Stanford University.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Tia Rich, and it's my honor to direct Stanford's Contemplation by Design program. In this program, we have the pleasure to receive the wisdom and insights and good sense of Tara Brach. She'll be speaking to us today in a program titled Awakening Radcial Compassion. Tara Brach is the founder and guiding teacher of the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, D.C. She is the author of several books, international best-selling Radical Acceptance, True Refuge, Radcial Compassion, and Trusting the Gold. And her popular weekly podcast is downloaded over 3 million times a month. Along with Jack Kornfield, Tara leads the Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Certification Program, serving participants from around the world. Tara's teachings blend Western psychology and Eastern spiritual practices, mindful attention to our inner life, and a full, compassionate engagement with our world. Welcome, Tara. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much, Tia, and welcome, friends. You know, I've just been really looking forward to this, aware of amazing set of offerings over these days. So a deep bow to the organizers, to Tia, Hunter, Lisa, and thank you, each of you, for choosing to be part of it. I'm sensing how thirsty our world is for what's being offered here. And if I had to name a common denominator of the many reflections and contemplations, it's really growing our capacity for open-hearted presence. You know, I often think of the Dalai Lama. He was interviewed by the press many years ago when his book on happiness came out. And somebody asked him to share the happiest moment of his life. And he gave them this warm but mischievous look. And his response was, "I think now." And I think of that so often, that this is it. So in the spirit of nowness, I'd like to share a short reflective kind of poem. This is by Martha Postlewaite. And you might, just a part of arriving right now, lower your gaze or close your eyes and just bring your attention inside for a moment. She writes, "Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. Create a clearing in the dense forest of your life. Create a clearing in the dense forest of your life." You might sense this as an inner pause. Perhaps take a few long, full, deep breaths. Inhaling, filling the chest and the lungs. And with the out breath, slow out breath, feel the letting go of the breath. Feel the sensations of exhaling. And then inhaling again, filling the chest and the lungs. And with the out breath, you might see what wants to let go a little. Maybe some tightness in the shoulders. Again, inhaling deeply. And with each out breath, a letting go of tightness, perhaps softening your hands, your belly. Maybe letting go of thoughts that aren't so necessary right now. Clearing the mind. letting go of any tightness or defendedness around the heart. So as your breath now resumes in its natural rhythm, just feeling that possibility of relaxing with what's right here. Senses awake, open and present. Thank you. It always helps me to take a pause, kind of a homecoming. And we know we have that dense forest. We all know it. It's the demands and the worries and the plans and our to-do list. So pausing and presence are the grounds of what I call radical compassion, which is really the full or mature expression of compassion. It's really an expression of our evolutionary potential. And the qualities that go with radical compassion are that it's embodied. It's an embodied caring. It's not mental, it's not abstract or distant. Rather, there's a felt sense of tenderness. And the second quality is that it's all-inclusive. And it's not just for some people, but really includes all beings. The third quality is that compassion is active. It's in some way acted upon out of caring. So compassion's part of our wiring. It's a built-in capacity, and it easily shuts down. We lose access, especially when we're stressed or fearful. And so we can see this right now in our society. We're really witnessing a time of actually staggering contrasts, and I'll name them a bit. There's that great shadow of fear and violence that's playing out, and also, and I know many of you feel that, this kind of a dramatic, accelerated pace and growing consciousness, compassion in action. Here we are, and we're in the thick of so much global trauma. We know it, the climate emergency, the pandemic, the growth of fundamentalism, the surfacing of white supremacy and anti-democratic forces. I mean, we can feel the hostility and the rage and the mistrust. And it's across the population, and there's spikes individually, and many we know in loneliness, anxiety, depression. I think of it that our suffering, both individually and as a society, comes from forgetting that we belong to one another. And it's extreme right now. And so in juxtaposition, consciousness is consciously evolving. In other words, we're waking up to how we can actually facilitate our mindfulness and compassion, and more people are practicing meditation than ever. Meditation in corporations and athletic teams and prisons. In DC, we've offered classes in the Superior Court. I've taught at the U.S. Senate and the House, and there's schools all over. It's out there. I love the Dalai Lama's projection that if 8-year-olds everywhere were taught mindfulness, there would be peace in the next generation. So we know it. There's more individuals and groups than ever trying to save our Earth and trying to undo racism and bridge the divides. I want to share a story that moved me. That I saw it in a documentary featuring Van Jones, who's a friend, and he's a news commentator, a writer. And he organized a meeting between people from South Central LA. They were Black organizers who were focusing on the crack epidemic. He flew them to West Virginia to meet with white people there from the community leaders who are trying to address the opioid crisis. And they all met in a conference room for a number of days. And as you watch, you can sense incredible differences in these groups, their political parties, their culture, the race, views. At one point, but they started talking and things started coming up and they started finding their points of connection. And at one point, each of them brought a photo of someone who had died in the epidemic. And they were often family members or children. And they'd hold the photo and talk about who that person was in their life. One man, he had his son, he said, the last thing I told my son, you got yourself into this, you get yourself out. And very soon after he died of an overdose. And so just bearing witness to the tears, and that after a relatively short time, this is days, these two really different groups of humans were looking at each other in an entirely different way. So I bring this in because it really points to the hope for healing. Sri Nisargadatta, one of my teachers, no longer alive, talks about how the mind creates the abyss and the heart crosses it. And we need more crossing. We need more people sharing pictures and sharing their vulnerability, and because it reminds us of our belonging. It wakes up our heart. So while compassion is a natural capacity, it needs cultivation, both actively with others, as in that example, and also grounded in our own being, self-compassion. Because to widen the circles, we need to embrace and care about the life that's right here. So what I'd like to do in our time together is share a compassion practice that does just that. And it's based on the acronym RAIN. The acronym stands for R is recognize, A is allow, I is investigate, and N is nurture. And it's basically weaving together mindfulness and compassion. And I want to share with you that through this pandemic, these last couple of years, I got such a flood of emails saying, RAIN saved my life, reconnected me. And I wrote the book on RAIN, the guidebook on RAIN, which is Radcial Compassion, after one of my own experiences of reconnecting. And as it goes, my mom, when she was 82, came down to live with my partner and me here in Virginia. And she came at a time that I was, running up against a million deadlines and really busy, could be all times. And I also felt very much like I wanted to make it good for her. I wanted to give her a real home. I was continually caught in feeling guilt, like I was falling short with her, and anxiety, like I was going to fail in some way in terms of my work and teaching and so on. And I remember one day I was here at my computer. I was actually composing a talk on loving kindness. And she came into my office with an article to show me, and I barely looked over. So she very graciously put down the article and started walking out, and as I saw her retreating form, I thought to myself, I don't know how long I have with her. And that's when I said, oh, okay, I'm going to do some RAIN here. And I sat down and just started practicing with the guilt, with the anxiety. The R was just to recognize, okay, guilt, anxiety, and it's good to I kind of mentally whisper it. And the A is, okay, allow it, not to judge it, not to push it away, not to ignore it, just let it be here. And for me, I often will say, this belongs with the allow, because it's like a wave in the ocean. It's just part of what's here right now. The I, investigate. Kind of investigates primarily somatic, where you really feel it in your body. But I started with, what am I believing? And the belief was, I'm failing my mother, I'm going to fail, in my work and teaching. And underneath that, in my body, was that squeeze of, in my chest, that squeeze of fear. And so I deepened the investigation to feel into it, to the kind of right where I felt most vulnerable. And if you can see, you can probably see I have my hand right here. I often, when I'm investigating, will put my hand on my heart because it actually begins the nurturing. And it also helps me stay in my body, which is so important. So I breathed with the fear, and I felt it from the inside. And I really asked inwardly, what does it really need? What does this part of me need? And the nurturing was responding to the felt need. It was in some way sending the message to myself just to trust my goodness, to trust I cared, that I cared about my mom, I cared about my work, that it was going to be okay. Just feeling it right now, just to sense that trusting. And that created more space. I felt just more open, more tender. There's after you do the 4 steps of rain, after the rain is kind of time where you just notice the shift and really rest in that. And I was more open. It wasn't a one-shot. I did rain a lot, but it could be very quick, just a minute, because you can just move through the steps and get some sense of an opening, a shift in identity from that guilty, anxious self to more of a field of presence, of kindness. And it shifted with my mom, that when I was with her, I was really with her, so we'd have our big salads in the late afternoon, or we'd go for our walks on the river, and I was there. And she died about 3 or 4 years later, and I adored her, so there was a lot of grief, and there were no regrets because I had really been there. And I realized that rain saved my life moments with my mom. And so that kind of got me going in terms of writing about it. Rain allows, and when I say rain, I'm really talking about weaving mindfulness and compassion, because this is just a systematic way of doing that. It really shifts our sense of who we are. There's a wonderful image that points to this shift of living from the small reactive emotions and thoughts to a larger sense of beingness. And it comes from a story about a gigantic statue of the Buddha in Thailand. And it wasn't a beautiful statue. It was actually really loved because it had survived the centuries, storms and battles and different rulers. But it was, a plaster clay, big monster statue. Well, in the 50s, there was a long dry season and cracks appeared. And one monk took a flashlight, shined it into the crack, and what shined back at him was the gleam of brilliant gold. And they checked out the other cracks, and they ended up taking off what turned out to be covering. And inside was the largest solid gold statue of the Buddha in all of Southeast Asia. I have a number of friends who have visited. It's got a very compelling presence. And what's interesting is the monks say that, and historians say this too, that the statue is covered to protect it during tumultuous times. There were raiding armies at that time into Siam that would have stolen or destroyed it. But they say it was covered to protect it, much in the way that we cover over our own innate goodness and purity as we move through a difficult world, each of us. We take on coverings. Egoic coverings are not bad. They're just ways of navigating. And some of the strategies do cause us trouble when we get really controlling or defensive or aggressive. But here's where the suffering is, that we get identified with the coverings, with the beliefs, with the emotions, with the personality, and we forget who's looking through the mask. We forget that field of presence, that tender awake heart. The times we need self-compassion, that we really need that presence when we're stuck, are usually the times that it's most difficult to access anything, that to even remember, well, what am I supposed to do when I'm stuck? Which is why rain is very useful, because it has for steps that are fairly easy to remember, even when we're very, very caught in reactivity. But it's helpful just to take for a moment a closer look at what is happening when we're caught in our coverings, when we're caught in anger, or fear, or self-aversion. And it is a limbic hijack in the sense that our survival brain takes over. In some way, we're actually in a sort of trance. And I think you probably know what I mean. That the world shrinks, we get very fixated, and we lose contact with our full aliveness, with our full intelligence. We don't have access to our creativity or to our heart. In other words, we get identified with the coverings, we're in a trance, and we forget the gold. And neuroscientists can show now what's happening in those moments. That the prefrontal cortex, our most recently evolved brain, is somewhat deactivated. It's not integrated. And we're literally being run by the survival brain in some way. So, as I mentioned, the times that we are lost in the dense forest, when we least can find a clearing, that's when we need rain. And I'd like to just mention the three most common ways that a limbic trance appears. Just these are the signals. These are the signs saying, this is a good time, if you can pause, to just walk through these steps so you can find your way back into an integrated brain and a more whole being. So the first one, and I think most of you will relate to all of these, the first one is when there's anxious, obsessive thinking, when there's that circling in the mind. And what happens is we get disembodied and we're fixated on what's going to go wrong, something's going to go wrong. It's as if we're perpetually trying to figure something out. I remember a story heard years back of a mom sends her son an email, and what it says is, "Start worrying, details to follow." And we know what that's like. It's like anxiety waiting for the next target to glom onto, right? So in this first flag, most of our thoughts are colored by a background of insecurity. So that's the first flag of limbic trance. The second is that when we're stressed and insecure, the survival brain tends to blame others, tension and conflict with others. Life's not going our way. We make others wrong, and that's what we often think of as bad othering. There's a story of a woman in a job interview, and the interviewer asks, "Well, tell me, what do you think your biggest character defect would be?" And her response is honesty. The interviewer says, "Honesty? I wouldn't consider honesty a defect." And the applicant's reply, "I don't care what the hell you think." And it's a totally silly example. And when we're hijacked, it happens quickly. We often say or do or send things we regret. So, and often the blame, the lashing out, is when others don't agree with us. We're very identified with our views and beliefs. So much so that now we're at a point in the United States that people of a different political party are considered to be morally less than. We're very threatened when people have different takes. There's a saying that the world is divided into those who think they're right. And that's the whole saying. So it's dangerous to be so attached to our beliefs, because being right means we'll go into actions that can be really harmful. Those that disagree easily become the enemy, the bad other. And we can feel that in our world right now. So much fear and hatred. And here's the thing, no matter how progressive our beliefs, when we're fearful, the survival brain generates that trance of blame. I'm right, bad other. And we're participating in the violence and the suffering of our society. We're part of a collective trance. Okay, so I've named two of the flags. One is that obsessive, anxious thinking. The other is bad othering. The third is turning against ourselves, bad self. And it's so pervasive, that sense of a harsh inner judge. It can be the chronic background to everything, that sense of I'm falling short, I'm never enough. I love this cartoon of a dog saying, you know, it's always good dog this and good dog that, but is it ever great dog? You know, so sometimes this sense of something's wrong with us is you know, just a chronic background. It's kind of low level, and sometimes it's really acute, a deep sense of a failure, a flawedness, of shame. Either level, I call this the trance of unworthiness. Because if we were in a live setting, I'd probably ask you how many of you feel like you judge yourself too much. And most of us know we do. It's very deep in our cultural psyche to do so. We don't realize how that undercurrent of not okay keeps us from feeling intimate with others, or from taking risks, from being creative or spontaneous, or just really relaxing. You know, I often think that the most fundamental truths are the ones that we forget most regularly. And one is that we can't be happy, we can't be fully caring or love our world if we're turned against ourselves. I remember one woman describing being at her mother's deathbed, and her mother came out of a coma and looked at her with that kind of lucidity sometimes people can have coming out of a coma for some moments. And she said to her daughter, you know, all my life I thought something was wrong with me. And she closed her eyes and she died. Those were the last words that she said. And for her daughter, it was this real wake up about how this trance of unworthiness, these feelings of unworthiness can impact our whole life and really cut us off from others. And it feels important to say that our contemporary society reinforces this trance of unworthiness, this sense of something's wrong. There's little innate sense of belonging to earth, to family, to community, to ancestors that help us to reconnect with wholeness. And instead, there's a lot of competition to meet certain standards for how we should be in order to be accepted and loved. Standards like having a certain kind of body, or a certain kind of personality, or being successful in certain ways, or intelligence. I think so often of how the kind of education that people have, that the intelligence that's most valued, and it's a hierarchy, is an intelligence some children have, some don't, this left brain intelligence. And how many children come out feeling stupid in some way, which makes me really sad. The most toxic amplification of something's wrong, of not believing, not belonging, comes from institutionalized violence against non-dominant populations. And the most glaring is in the United States, our racial caste system. I think of Toni Morrison saying, you know, in this country, being American means being white. Everybody else has to hyphenate. So society's basic message to the marginalized populations is you're inferior. Your life is not as valuable. Okay, so I've been talking about the flags of trance for each of us, and whether it has to do with self-judging, or being turned on others, against others aggressively, or, you know, bad othering, or when we're anxious and obsessing, we're identified with the coverings, and we're contracted away from our wholeness, from the gold. And I remember a friend of mine who's a palliative caregiver, and she wrote about this, talking about the greatest regret of the dying. She was with tens of thousands of people when they were dying, and she said, the greatest regret is not living true to ourselves, that we live according to the expectations of others or our own inner judgments, not living true to our hearts. And it feels to me that this regret is in many of us as a kind of a disappointment that there's in the background we're sensing in our daily life how we are living identified with the coverings, that in some way we've forgotten something larger, this kind of mystery that really has to do with loving awareness, compassion, presence. So I'd like to now move directly into how rain can awaken us from that trance, from that identification with the coverings, to help us remember. And again, rain is recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And a note about the sequence, it's not rigid. In fact, it's useful because it has a sequence of steps. And yet, as you get involved with it, you'll find that sometimes you start with nurturing and nurture throughout. You know, as you're investigating, have it be a gentle, kind investigation. I think of Luis Cozzolino. He's an attachment psychologist, and he described how it's not survival of the fittest, it's a survival of the nurtured. Especially if you're working with trauma. We risk re-triggering trauma if we go directly into trying to contact. With rain, it's recognize, allow, investigate, really contacting it. We risk re-triggering. So take as much time as is needed to nurture, to create some sense of safety. Maybe do the practice with a healer or a therapist, because it's only when there's some degree of safety that we can then make use of it in a way that's going to be helpful. Okay, I'll share a couple of examples more to help you as you practice, because we're going to be practicing this together soon. One story I thought I'd tell, this happened years ago, but because during the pandemic, so many parents went through so much in terms of their parenting. It's been so hard. One mom, and this isn't recent, as I said, was really upset because her teenage daughter, who was then a high school senior, her grades were tanking and she was smoking a lot of pot. There was an angry, defensive distance between them, and she felt responsible because she was working full time and didn't feel like she was attending well. But she was also really angry that her daughter's behaviors were in some way really undermining her. So we started rain with the anger. And she recognized, okay, angry, whispered it out loud, allowed it to be there. This belongs. This is part of life right now. The I, investigate, she felt it in her body. And as she really opened to it, and with anger, it's really important, maybe start with the story of why you're angry, but then get into the embodied sense of it, because the story can keep you looping forever. So feeling the anger in her body and letting it be as big as it was, that heat and that explosiveness. And what she found when she let it really be big was under the anger was fear. There was a fear for her daughter's well-being, a fear that things would go really wrong for her daughter. And right with that fear was a deep shame. It's my fault. That's the belief. And that sinking feeling that went with it. And when I asked her, how long have you felt that? She really said, all my life. I feel like I've been failing all my life. It was very young, early experience of personal badness. And I invited her to investigate, to feel that badness and to feel how much it had kind of contracted her life, held her life as prisoner, And she got then open to a wave of sorrow, what I sometimes call a soul sadness, when we see the landscape of life lost while we're at war with ourselves, all the moments that we were down on ourselves when we could have been living, opening, creating, connecting. So she had that wave of sorrow and grieving. And then I did the final investigating piece, which is, what does that part of you most need? And for her, it was to really trust that she loved her daughter, that she cared, that she was doing her best. And then N, or the nurturing, she had her hand on her heart and she sent that message in. And there was a shift in after the rain, those periods afterwards. She really felt that she had moved from an angry, failing self to a space of compassion. And she did a number of rounds, and she was increasingly able, through the rain process, to see her daughter more clearly, her daughter's fears, and actually to help create a safe space for her daughter to talk more to her. Because here's the thing. When we do that self-compassion, that inner healing, there is a widening of circles. So we can hold each other. We can be with each other in a much clearer way. And we need to practice it because, as mentioned, compassion can be cut off in moments. It's stress, it's fear, and all of a sudden we're in a reaction to others. So we start with self-compassion. I remember many, many years ago hearing about the United States Army actually built into its trainings anger management program that included mindfulness and self-compassion. And one lieutenant was forced to take the program because of his temper, and he took it. And as the story goes, one evening he went to the supermarket. He had a whole lot to do after he got home, so he just rushed through, piled up his cart, got into line. The woman in front of him only had one item, but she wasn't in the express line. She was in his, and she had a young child. And she handed the young child over to the clerk, and they were oohing and eyeing, and he started exploding inside. He's really angry. Who does she think she is? And I've got a lot to do, and I'm really busy, and why isn't she in the other lane? And a lot of aggression. And then he remembered, oh yeah, mindfulness, compassion. So he went inward. He just took some full breaths, and he sensed what was going on, anger, let it be there. He felt it. He breathed with it, and he could sense underneath it was that fear of not getting everything done and life falling apart. And it's okay. It's okay. That simple. His breaths became fuller, opened his eyes, and he noticed that the little girl was kind of cute. Okay, that woman left. It was his turn, and he said to the clerk, that little girl was adorable. And she beamed. She said, oh, well, that's my little girl. My husband was killed in Afghanistan last year, and my mom brings her over, so we have a little time to visit twice a day. So I share that not because everyone we meet has such a huge immediate loss, but the truth is every one of us is vulnerable and uncertain. We all face the loss of our lives and the loss of others we love. And what would this world be like if we could slow down with each other and remember? If inwardly we could come back home so we could hold each other with a little more care and presence. There's that wonderful saying, be kind. Everyone you meet, and this includes yourself, is fighting a hard battle. Everyone. Everyone's living with difficulty. There's a little story, metaphor that I find helps in remembering that. And if you imagine you're in the woods and you see it right near a tree, a little dog, and you go to pet it, and the dog lurches at you with its fangs bared and, kind of ferocious, and you go from feeling friendly to really being angry and scared, but then you realize the dog has its leg in a trap. And then you shift again, and you might not get really close because there's danger, but your heart's open again. And if we could remember that however a person is behaving, including ourselves, that when it's a behavior that seems unwise or hurtful, there's a leg in a trap. When we're happy, when we're awake, when we're feeling inwardly free, we don't go around hurting each other. So this is a powerful training in seeing the vulnerability. And we have to start by being able to, with rain, see our own vulnerability and open to it. And then widen the circles. We suffer when we forget our belonging to our inner life, to each other, to all living beings, to humans, to non-humans, to this living earth. That creates the suffering. And like those two groups, the ones from LA and the ones from West Virginia sharing pictures, opening to a shared heart space, the mindfulness and compassion of rain gives us an inner pathway to remember belonging, to really cherishing and caring for all life. Okay, I think enough words from me as background. I'd like to explore with you the rain practice directly. For those who are inclined, I'm going to also suggest some journal questions as we go that, if you like writing, can be helpful. And if it would help you to, in some way, stand, stretch, and then resettle, please feel free, because you want to feel yourself here in your body, awake. So you might take a moment to move around and remember there is a body here. We quickly forget. One of the great spiritual teachings is try not to go far from your body. And as you settle in, make sure you're comfortable. I invite you to scan your life, and you might sense a place where you get stuck, where you get emotionally reactive, maybe in a repeating way. It might be something to do with a relationship, with your family or parenting, with your partner. It might have something to do with work or maybe an addictive behavior, finances, health. It might be to do with the larger society, some of what's going on in our world, but a place where you get stuck, where you get smaller, where you're in that trance, in the coverings, reactive. Maybe the kind of reactivity where you turn on yourself, or you get into self-blame, or maybe you're blaming others. So scanning, finding some situation where you'd like more freedom, more wakefulness, more heart. And once it's in mind, it helps perhaps to lower your gaze or close your eyes and take a few full breaths. And as if you're watching the situation on a film, just move through the slides or the frames till you get to the place where your reactivity really gets triggered, where you get angry or fearful or go into self-blame, self-judgment. And just freeze the frame there. And if somebody else is involved, you might be aware of the look on their face or the words they're saying. Be aware of the setting, the room you're in. And sensing what's the worst part of this for you, what you're most fearing or upset about. So you can really enter inside it a bit. The beginning of rain is, what are you recognizing? What's the strongest emotion you're aware of? There might be two. But whatever you're noticing, I invite you to whisper it softly. It could be out loud or in your mind. And then let your intention be to allow, to let be what's there. So allowing is this willingness to pause and just let life be as it is, not to judge it or ignore it, not to push it away. If you find it's helpful, you might just say, this belongs, or sometimes I say yes, not that I like it, but yes, this is the actuality of the moment. Or just remind myself it's possible to be with, it's okay. And that will give you access to investigating. And the mode of investigating is gentle, kind, really inquiring into what's going on in your body primarily. And if you feel drawn, you might put your hand on your heart as a way to accompany yourself. It can help. And so you're first just beginning to sense, well, what's the worst part of this? What most wants my attention? And as you ask that, scan through your body. You might sense your throat, your chest, your belly. What most wants your attention? And you might also ask, what's the most difficult, painful thing I'm believing right now? The part that's most upset. What's its view of life? Is it that I'm failing? Or that I'm unlovable or unworthy? Or that I can't trust others? Or that somebody else is wanting to hurt me? They wouldn't act that way if they cared. You know, what's the belief from the part of you that's reactive? And when you're believing that, when there's a view like that, what does it feel like inside? And really go into your body where you feel the most vulnerability. It can be very helpful to actually let your body and your face express the feeling. So there may be a posture, there may be a facial expression. This is a way to go deeper if you want to. If you're angry, maybe your hands make fists and your face as a grimace. If you're scared, you may be hunching your shoulders, protecting your chest. Taking a posture, expressing with your face, and then feeling inside again, right to the core of where you feel vulnerable. See if you can feel the sensations there. It's clenched or raw or hot or sore. And if you haven't already, you might, again, experiment gently putting your hand on your heart to, it's kind of part of the transition to nurture. And it also helps you stay connected with the vulnerable experience inside. The last part of investigation, you might sense you're listening from a very compassionate presence, but stay connected. How does this part want you to be with it? Just find out. How does it want you to be with it? What does it most need from you or from some larger source of love and wisdom? Is it understanding? Forgiveness? Compassion? Company? Love? Holding, protection? Take some moments to breathe consciously, feeling what's there. And you might adjust your posture in a way that helps you to fully contact your most awake experience of heart and mind. Some can perceive that as your high self, your future self, your true nature. But sit in a way that helps you to access that, just calling on this wise and compassionate expression of your being. And if that feels hard, you might call on another being that has that kind of wisdom and love that you trust. It might be a friend or a family member. It could be your dog, a pet, a teacher, a spiritual figure. But call on that larger source of beingness, your own awake heart or an awake heart in this universe. Call on that for the nurturing. And from that source, your own awake being or some other larger source, offer inwardly what's needed. The love, the acceptance, the compassion. You might begin by extending care through words. Perhaps there's a message that's healing. Saying to that vulnerable place, I'm here, I'm not leaving, I'm not going to abandon you. Or perhaps trust your goodness, trust your heart. Or if it's fear, you might say, thank you for trying to protect me. I'm okay right now. Or you're held in love. You're held in love. And as you do, you might again sense the touch, the hand on your heart, and the energy coming through that hand, as if from your spiritual heart to your human heart. Or let there be some imagery, seeing that inner place embraced and surrounded and bathed by light. Experiment with nurturing. Curious and open, letting in care. See if it's possible to let care, love, bathe every part of you. Wash through every part of you, so there's a kind of dissolving, a letting go into loving awareness. And in these moments after completing the active steps of rain, in what we call after the rain, just like a real rain, it's after the rain that the flowering and flourishing happens. Just notice the quality of presence that's emerged. Is there more spaciousness? More tenderness? More clarity? Let yourself get familiar with the field of presence that's here. Noticing the shift from, let's say, the judging self or the bad self or the blaming self to this space of loving awareness, presence. And of course, if you're feeling some new or residual difficulty, which often happens, there can be many rounds of rain, just offer this your acknowledgement and care. You might sense what you want to remember, what's going to serve you in the days and weeks to come. And if you feel like doing some journaling, before you completely step out of a more conscious meditation, you might ask yourself in these moments, what is the quality of presence that's here? What is the sense of my being, of who I am? And how has this shifted from when I began the meditation? What's the quality of presence that's here, and how has it shifted? Okay, thank you, friends, for your willingness to, really courage to explore. And we will be opening to your questions. Tia will be moderating.
Thank you, Tara, for guiding us in a RAIN practice. Those of you who seek to offer your question, please type it into the Q&A feature of this webinar. I'll begin with some questions that already have arrived. Tara, one person asks, similar to the red flags of trance, are there signs during the RAIN practice that indicate or suggest that it would be helpful to seek a relationship with a teacher or a therapist?
I'm actually really glad that question is front and center, because RAIN is not always good for every person, as you're intuiting in that question. There are times when we're feeling so unresourced, feeling panicky, feeling lost in confusion or grief or fear, where there's actually something else first, which is a certain kind of what we call resourcing, that it might be with a teacher or a healer, where we begin to in some way find our way to feeling some safety and love. And in Buddhism, the loving kindness practice, just simply offering phrases of care inwardly, are the practices of, moving and walking and breathing that can help ground us, or the direct grounding practices of feeling the weight of our body and feeling the hug of Earth's gravitational field, looking around and seeing what is right here, feeling the fabric of our clothing. There are many practices that might precede RAIN that help us get more grounded, stable, resilient, feeling safe, so that we have some grounds for doing the exploration of RAIN. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to be feeling terrific, because the whole idea is when we're feeling off kilter with RAIN that we want to bring these steps forward. But if it's near trauma, the signals of panicking, overwhelm, feeling completely unsafe, then I would pause the RAIN practice and emphasize what I'm describing as resourcing. So thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for your response. Building on the specific steps, I'll continue with questions focused in that regard. We have a question that says, in the recognized stage, is it helpful to name all the emotions that arise?
If there's a cluster, name them, and then just listen inwardly to what's most asking for attention, because often it's a constellation. I mean, that's just the way we human psyches work, is that there's a layering and a constellation. But if you ask that question, really what most wants my attention, often there's an entry point, and it could be one or two emotions that feel predominant. And then that's the time, just as you say, to name them. The naming itself is actually the beginning of healing. I mean, there have been studies, I think it was Southern California, University of California, the power of naming or noting what's going on is it begins to activate the prefrontal cortex and quiet some, the limbic system. So already we're coming more online just by naming what's here.
Thank you for clarifying the power of naming. In the RAIN practice, how do you handle it when you are so stuck and investigate, so deeply and strongly connected to the pain and the need that you cannot move on to nurture?
In a way, the more fully we're able to investigate, and by investigate, really contact the pure somatic experience of what's there in the body, the more there's a natural tenderness that will arise for nurturing. But what gets in the way is that we tend to go off in stories and in some way leave our bodies some. And as they say, the issues are in the tissues. So often part of our training in RAIN is just learning to come back to the body, to ask the kind of questions that help us feel our throat and our chest and our belly. And again, the hand helps. And to build in the nurturing as you're investigating. So there's a sense of care. I sometimes think of investigating that there's our shadows are like in the woods, these shy creatures, and they're afraid. It doesn't feel safe to come out fully. And that the way we invite them out into the meadow, the light of awareness, is really that simplicity of, I care, I'm here, you're invited. It's invitational. And if that's the atmosphere, then we can begin to contact in a really direct way the felt experience and start sensing a kind of enlargement of tenderness as really part of what is here. So again, it's just to be willing to go deeper. Now, for some people, they'll say, well, if I go deeper, I'll get completely stuck and overwhelmed and buried in the feeling. And that's a sign of stepping back and taking some time to resource with kindness, just kindness, soften the field, and then go back in gently.
Thank you for illuminating the compassionate quality that can be nurturing during investigate. Thank you. The next question states, I love the practice of RAIN and radical compassion. Do you have any suggestions for how to remain compassionate even when others around us don't give us the same thoughtfulness? Perhaps relatedly, what might be the relationship between compassion and boundary making?
Fabulous. Thank you. Because many people have this notion, a false notion, that if we're compassionate, it's like we're giving a green light for other people to step on us in some ways. And I have found that self-compassion actually gives us access to very intelligent boundary making. So when you are compassionate towards yourself, but others are not treating you in that way, the next place for RAIN is the feelings that come up when people don't treat you with compassion. In other words, don't try to shift into compassion for the other person. That's what's sometimes called premature forgiveness or premature transcendence. Stay with your own experience. I sometimes think of it as making a U-turn, that when somebody else is treating us badly, and our attention tends to fixate on them, bad person, all the stories about what they're doing, what's wrong, take that trajectory and turn it around and come back and say, how am I experiencing this? And go under the storyline. The freedom of RAIN happens when we can get under the stories and back to our body over and over. So go back to the body. Okay, so how does it feel? Oh, I feel anger, and underneath the anger, I feel hurt. Because anger is always a sign that there's something we care about, something we're trying to protect. I feel hurt, and then bring the nurturing to the hurt place. And if you really get the knack of holding the hurt place with care, your sense of being becomes expanded, and you'll be able to see more clearly how that person has their leg in a trap. You'll see more clearly their vulnerability. You'll see more clearly the gold that's hidden but trying to shine through. And most important, you won't take it so personally, because that's always the trap. So make the U-turn. Don't try prematurely to forgive or be compassionate towards others.
Building upon that helpful answer, we're going to apply it further with this question. I can nurture my own fear, but how can I use rain when I encounter someone who is actually afraid of me or who hates me enough to want to take away my voting rights or other rights?
Yeah, I want to go slowly here. So we be with our own fears, and then we feel the energy from others who are actually messengers of a whole field of consciousness in the society that is fearful and punitive and oppressive. Okay, and what do we do as we experience that oppressive energy? Like, that's the question. Like, how do we deal with oppressive energy? How do we take care of ourselves? The response in terms of our inner practice is pretty much what I've been saying. We sense how it's impacting us. We sense the anger, the fear, the hurt, whatever's there, and we hold that with kindness. But that's not enough. We also need to practice with each other, because company is stronger than willpower. We can stay with things longer. But more than that, it shifts from being my feeling of oppression to the feeling of oppression. My anger at the oppressor to the anger at the oppressor. My feelings of hurt or powerlessness to the feelings of hurt or powerlessness. And that's profound. Because when we realize this isn't personal, this is a playing out of a group or structural phenomena, then we get empowered. And when we explore it with other people and we sense that we're part of a we, and it doesn't have to be an us-them, but we're part of a we, we're part of a growing number of people that really care about freedom, that's where the hope is. And I found for myself, not that I have experienced directly on my personhood the oppressiveness, as a woman some, but I am so close with so many now that have, and have so much pain around it, that it's in the collecting together and facing the anger and grief and heartbreak and the current sense of, a lot of dread because of the direction things are going, but being together in that, we can also remember the goal that we care. And there's a real power in sensing that shared care. I want to name one other thing, which is because of our survival brain, we tend to have that negativity bias where we really sort for what's wrong. And it's really easy to do it these days. It really is. There's so much fear in our society, and there is a growing shadow force right now that's scary. And if we want to be able to move forward wisely and powerfully, we have to also remember the gold that lives through all beings. It's like Fred Rogers said, when he was scared, his mother said, remember the helpers. There are huge numbers of people that care deeply about waking up out of our racial caste system, waking up out of classism, bridging the divide. There are a lot of us that care. Remembering and tapping into that caring helps all of us to move forward in a way that can make a difference.
Thank you. With a simpler question, how often do you suggest doing the rain practice?
It's actually a really helpful, I'm glad somebody brought that up, because the most important thing, I think, in terms of our inner work is that we create a pause at least every day to create a clearing, and I have to say that for myself, I was lucky because I joined a spiritual community when I was in my 20s, and we would practice together, and that makes it much easier. But then I left the community and I had a baby. And so what that meant was my practice got wobbly for some months. And then I realized I had put a lot of money in the bank, but I was drawing on it. And I really needed a daily practice of coming back home to myself. And I made a commitment, which is every day, no matter what. My son's 35, and I've kept that, but I had a back door. The invitation is this: experiment and see what happens if you say every day, no matter what. But it can be, I remember times with my son when he was young, I'd be at the end of an exhausting day and I'd plop down. I had an altar and I'd just sit and take about a minute of breathing and I'd say, bless all beings, and, I'd go to bed. So let it run the spectrum. You'll find it's a little bit of a trick, because once you come into stillness, there's a kind of an inclination to keep staying a little bit, but your practice might be a walking meditation, just every day, a period of time dedicated to presence. And then where rain fits in, if during that practice or at any time during the day, you get stuck, you can either do a light rain, a very brief rain, or you can do a longer one if you have the time. A light rain is just literally, anxious. Okay, let it be here. Breathe. It's okay. Move on. And there's more space. A more full rain is what you just did. People are now doing rain partners, like tens of thousands of people have rain partners to practice every other week with, and these are people they might not know. They do it online and so on. All of the teachers in our teacher training program have rain partners as part of their practice, because it gives a powerful and deep way, not just to quiet difficult emotions, but to remember who we really are, to remember the goal, to remember that awareness and love that really holds these lives. It allows that kind of profound spiritual shift. So I recommend, using it as a need be basis, but keeping that every day, no matter what, time of coming into your own heart and mind as kind of centerpiece.
Thank you. Throughout your comments and teachings, you have mentioned the power of listening to the body, of being embodied. And many students, especially as they aspire to careers and have demanding academic responsibilities, witness disembodiment and overriding the signals from their body to meet deadlines and deliverables. Could you speak to how someone who's aware of their disembodiment can work with that?
First, being aware of disembodiment is a great advantage. If we know it, we can have some choices. There are a lot of tricks that help through the day, wherever we are, whatever we're doing. We can be talking to somebody and just gain the habit of feeling our hands and softening our hands. We can talk to somebody and ask ourselves, what color eyes do they have? Because there's something when we're really looking to see that starts waking up our perceptual field and sensitivity. We can learn the art of the body scan. That's so powerful. Just build it into your daily meditation, a brief scan through the body. And then through the day, if you feel lost, come back, scan right through just for a few moments. Mostly it's taking many pauses to come back.
Thank you, Tara. We have another question. We know we are completely responsible for our own responses to our lives and its circumstances. What advice do you offer for how we can best support our children. In this situation, the children are experiencing a situation out of their control, their parents' divorce. How can we help build the children's skills of self-responsibility to how they feel?
Learning to be responsible, meaning able to respond, that we can self-regulate, is actually an evolutionary thing that we develop both as a species over eons and in a lifetime. And so the presumption isn't that they have it at the beginning. It's just that we are a container, a safe container for them to begin to experiment and find out what they have. But mostly it's us sending them the message of unconditional okayness. Mm-hmm. There is, I don't know as parents of anything more powerful than being a mirror of goodness. And by that, I don't mean inappropriate praise and inflation, but in families or situations with caregivers where there really is a mirroring of, I trust the depth of who you are. I love the depth of who you are. You know, I see the gold, and an engagement that even when we're being judgy or critical or anything, still keeps on having that as the basic container for everything. When children know that, they're able to self-regulate over time. Some of the tricks that help them to do it is to learn to talk with their emotions or see their emotions as with images. There are so many good books out right now. I'm so touched by the quality, the creative and beautiful quality of books. Check it out, Meditations for Children. They're not sitting and going inside, but they're engaged using body and movement and art and music to help children connect with their natural intelligence and their natural creativity and their natural sense of well-being. And as you ask in that question, when things are painful and terrible and it's out of their control, they can call on that. Just the way we as adults have to call on it, a kind of inner refuge that helps us through.
Thank you. We have another category of questions that have to do with emotions such as ambition, superiority, and pride. Could you speak to how the practice of RAIN can help address those inclinations?
As much as we have a trance of unworthiness, we have a trance of inflatedness, which is that we take ourselves very seriously. Many of us feel important. I did a whole chapter of a book where I focused on my challenge of special person, where I in some way was, as much as I would feel unworthy, I would also feel separate and special, like I knew something other people didn't. And it came after, especially after my first book came out. In some way I would teach and get into a very small idea of self, and I would see it happening, but it kind of separated me. And I went to war against a special person. And I decided special person was between me and freedom. And I was actually deeply embarrassed about special person. You know, it really brought up shame. So I went to war against special person and tried everything I knew, and it didn't work because, somehow or other special person dug in her heels. And I remember the time I was meditating when I had a very free, open meditation where my identity felt one with the universe and really spacious. And then some thought came up about an event I had to do and how many people would be there, and special person popped up. And I was just, it was kind of despairing, like, what can I do? So whether it's ambition or specialness or whatever it is that has to do with trying to promote or inflate the self, what happened to me was when I said, what can I do? Some wise place in me said, nothing. A self can't get rid of part of the self. Just let be. And somehow or other, there's a falling back and just saying, okay, this is just here, like it's another wave. And there was something in stopping the war and not considering the covering of specialness or importance or ambition or whatever as being like some evil thing, that actually allowed me a lot more presence and clarity and humor with it, so that my identity, it wasn't so sticky. So that was kind of a long way of responding, that it doesn't matter whether what we're hooked on, what part of the covering we're hooked on. The freedom comes when we can see it, when we can regard it with kindness and humor, because it really helps. And in that presencing with, we realize there's intensified presence, that we are more the presence than that story of a self. And that is where the freedom is. That realization that who you are is not that cluster of waves. You're the ocean that can gently cradle the waves on the surface. You just know you're more. And your oceanness is a shared field. It's all of us together. It's that shared field of loving awareness. That's where the freedom is.
Thank you, Tara. With all of the insights and teachings that you've offered us, we are enriched and have a lot to go forward with. You had wanted to have some time after the Q&A, so we'll transition now from the Q&A to allow you to have your closing period.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tia. And thank you, each of you. Each question, just, I felt your presence, and they really helped bring things alive. And I thought, just as closing, to take a moment and let your attention go inward. And notice how it is right now, kind of fresh, like bringing for the first time, right in this moment, a noticing or recognizing of the state of your heart. Feel the breath. Feel your body breathing. Just feel presence with whatever the state of heart is right now. And notice that you can make some gesture of kindness. It could be simply honoring what's here, appreciating what's here, offering compassion to what's here, but some gesture of kindness. Your spiritual heart in some way holding your human heart. Just opening the attention to feel a kind of collective heart space of all who are here. That heart space of all beings longing to love and be loved, all beings longing to wake up in a deep way. It's our shared belonging. And I'll close with a prayer that's actually a school prayer written by poet Diane Ackerman. She says, "In the name of daybreak and the eyelids of morning and the wayfaring moon and the night when it departs, I swear I will not dishonor my soul with hatred, but offer myself humbly as a guardian of nature, as a healer of misery, as a messenger of wonder, as an architect of peace. In the name of the sun and its mirrors and the uttermost night and the crowning seasons of the firefly and the apple, I will honor all life, wherever and in whatever form it may dwell, on earth my home, and in the mansions of the stars."
Thank you, Tara, for illuminating the path of wise compassion. Thank you.